How do you wish to be remembered? How do you sum up a man's life? How can you properly send off the monumental series that is John Wick? A series that literally changed the landscape of action cinema. A series that set the bar so high that film might never be able to achieve those heights again. The series created a modern mythology that turned Keanu Reeves into the 21st century equivalent of Hercules or Odysseus. Men who were held up in great regard and then had to face impossible odds in order to complete their tasks. And in these films, John Wick has to fight his own versions of minotaurs and gods in his quest for vengeance. And in John Wick Chapter 4, that grand scale of the Greek epic is felt from the very beginning. We cross-cut in the opening from John getting ready to confront the armies that await him to a seemingly never-ending desert. An homage to Lawrence of Arabia and the enormity of scale that John is unearthing. John is trying to tie up loose ends, to end the rule of the High Table, to kill the gods of the realm. But in doing so, his Sisyphean quest brings him back to where it all began. John severed his ring finger in John Wick Chapter 3 and lost his wedding ring as a price for recommitting himself to the High Table. His attempts to reclaim the ring at the beginning of John Wick 4 prove futile as he leaves Morocco without the reminder of his commitment to Helen, his wife. The High Table consumes all, takes all, and gives nothing back in return. We're told this right at the top, his fate prophesized, and yet John tries all he might to keep running, keep fighting, keep killing. He will kill as many as he has to, as many as he can. If it were up to John, he'd kill the whole damn world. But everything done within the world of John Wick has consequences. You kill John Wick's dog, he kills you. But in doing so,
you dip so much as a pinky back into this pond, you may well find something reaches out and drags you back into its depths.
Building from people's relationships with John from the first film and how that affects them, when John gets to the Osaka Continental, they're concerned about survival given what's happened with the New York Continental and Winston, and how that friendship with John led to the demise of the building, the death of Karen, and the excommunicado of Winston himself. Osaka is on high alert, but doesn't feel as though they've done anything to disrupt the High Table, until John shows up and then Shimazu is moved into action by loyalty and friendship with John. Even though his daughter is very much against the idea and he should just turn John over for the sake of their own skin, does that make them better than the people trying to kill them? Than the High Table? The High Table is over John and all the trouble he has brought for them. All the trouble that his connections have brought. But they can't just outright kill John Wick. Killing a man can turn him into a martyr. Letting him live tells the world he's a coward or a turncoat. So they have to show that there are consequences for his actions. Winston is a man who's done nothing but serve and abide by the rules for his entire time running the Continental, and because of his friendship with John Wick, because of his allyship to a friend, he sealed the fate of himself and the Continental. And look, he tried to change his fate, tried to outrun it and trick the High Table into letting him keep the Continental despite his actions in the previous film. But this is John Wick. This is all about actions and consequences, and John Wick Chapter 4 is the literalization of consequences. No one is above the table, and so the Continental is not only condemned, but Karen is killed to make a statement. The Marquis tells Winston, think about why you live. It asks Winston and really all of our main players to think about why they live in general, why they fight, why they protect, why they make the choices they do. If they die tomorrow, would they be happy with the life they've lived? At the end of Chapter 3, John rediscovers his reason for fighting. It's selfish, yes, but it reconnects him with humanity as he chooses to be John, the man, taking the love he and Helen had for one another and using that to fuel his righteous takedown of the High Table and their oppressive establishment. It doesn't entirely absolve John of a lifetime of wickedness, but for the first time, he's doing the right thing for the betterment of others. And so Chapter 4 is his quest, now that his beliefs have been reaffirmed, to destroy the High Table. Choices, actions, consequences, whatever your choices may be, you have to live with the consequences of those actions. But at least in one scenario, you can uphold your humanity. John is reminded of this by the words and example of a friend, and truthfully, all the friends who assisted him in a time of need, knowing full well they could be killed, and who all bravely faced the consequences of their actions. Violence, taking lives, and brutality all have repercussions. It changes people. But if something these killers are faced with is wrong, will they have the courage and heart to do the right thing, to challenge the establishment head on? Again, cut the shit. Killing is killing. It doesn't matter if you're following a rule book or living by your own code, it's all the same barbaric act. If you're going to be sucked up by the world and succumb to the violence, the least you can do is follow your own code instead of just following marching orders from an unjust elitist system. Be a killer with autonomy and understand when not to pull a trigger. John is poisonous to everyone he's in contact with, everyone he's friends or brothers with, but it's only because he's made the table afraid. They have to constrict harder, just as any authoritarian rule does when they sense their power is slipping and people are beginning to question and challenge the system, work outside it with their own code, a code founded upon mutual respect, love, and brotherhood. It's like people who blindly follow a religion no matter what versus people who lead with morals even if they go against the rules of said religion. Rules were written into law by man. Surely they can be changed or unwritten. The idea that this is what separates us from animals is a front. It's a way to justify and sanction violence while also exercising control. It's a way to give those in power even more power. It's a way to make those beneath you truly understand that they exist under the table. All of these actions have culminated in a world that John is fighting so hard to destroy. A world that for every head he destroys, two more grow to take its place. It's like a hydra. It makes you need to ask, where does John's quest end? The table will never stop. If he kills the Marquis, they'll just send another to take his place. It's an endless cycle of killing begetting more killing. John thinks he can just kill everyone and take down the table with him, but the reality is, no one, not even John Wick, can kill everyone. Endless rage and carnage just creates more John Wicks every day, who then become servants of the table. John has to be more than a mindless soldier taking lives. He has to become a symbol. He has to make his life mean something. He has to find something to die for, and I think deep down, he knows this. He knows what that thing is, but how can he become a symbol of that? When faced with that choice and how your life will end, what will become of it? I actually think that's why it's so brilliant that Karen quotes Ned Kelly with "such is life," because yeah, Ned fucking died, but he died believing in something bigger than himself. He died for a cause. John doesn't have that yet. He's still just killing to stay alive to preserve the memory of his wife. In this film, he has to use that memory as a way to connect and empathize with other people, and yeah, he can still get what he wants. He can make a statement and kill the gods to an extent, but he can become something more in the process. I mean, John is basically in purgatory right now and has to fight his way up to Mount Olympus to achieve his goal, Dante's Inferno. Death comes for everyone. That's why you have to live righteously while you still have the chance. Make it mean something. That's why I fucking love that line from Shimazu when he says, "A good death only comes after a good life." Both he and John had a taste of the other side. They enjoyed the good life while they still had a chance, and then death came knocking at their door, and they could either resist surviving, not really living in an eternal battle within a system designed to damn you, or accept your fate for what it is and die knowing you've lived the best you could for the right things. Kane, Shimazu, and John are all three men who managed to get out only to be forced back in by the system. In this world, with this governing body, you're never truly free, and as Kane finds out in the post-credits scene, in his quest to prevent the death of his daughter, he created another John Wick in Akira, and the cycle continues. Kane made a deal with the High Table out of love for his family to protect them, but is it worth the cost? Can he live with the consequences of his actions? Especially if he's forced to kill a friend in order to keep his daughter alive. survive. It brings the whole killing strangers motif from the first film full circle. We're killing strangers so we don't kill the ones that we love. It's a paradox because even when that happens, you're creating enemies, you're continuing the cycle. What happens if you're forced to kill a brother, someone you respect and have a relationship with, in order to get what you want? Will you choose to do it? At what point do you stop doing the bidding of a merciless feudal system designed to entrap you in a cycle of violence and brutality and start directing that aggression at the system itself? At what point do you become autonomous and start living in service of something greater that will prevent others from suffering a similar fate? John's fate may be set, but that doesn't mean everyone else's are. John is a cautionary tale, but also one of love. People can learn from his mistakes, but also become inspired by what he represents and what he reveals about the High Table and their rules. We may think that we don't have a choice, that the higher power holds all the cards, but when it ultimately comes down to a choice, who is the one holding the gun? You are the one who ultimately makes the choice to continue the cycle or break it. Both come with consequences, but what are the consequences you can accept? Those who cling to death live. Those who cling to life die. Marquis and the rest of the High Table offer Mr. Nobody $25 million plus a 401k contribution in order to kill John Wick. They think they can exercise control by lining the pockets of those who need the money, and it's not like their system has really allowed them to break outside of needing that money. And look, to be fair, it does incentivize many, even Nobody to an extent, though you get the sense that he's not entirely down with it all. He has an admiration for John and has been tracking him for some time. Tracker or Mr. Nobody, whatever you want to call him, it's one of those two, has to prove himself to be a man committed to the cause above himself, and he does so by pulling his hand through the knife rather than just pulling the knife out. But it's a deception that Marquis falls for. Tracker doesn't give a shit about the table, and he never will. He's in it for the money, for survival at all costs, and ultimately has a humanity hidden in his depths that the Marquis did not anticipate, because even the money means nothing if it comes at the cost of Mr. Nobody's soul. The table needs to believe its employees are committed to upholding the system, will put the system before the self. It's not enough to do something for the High Table, they need to believe you maintain belief in their cause at all costs. And in a similar way, John is using all of his resources to take them down. It's taking everything from him. If killing is killing off a piece of yourself with each life you take, then everyone John was cashing in on in Chapter 3 is now cashing in on him through his wrath. In order to challenge the Marquis to a duel, John has to belong to a family of the High Table. He must rebuild the relationship he had with his family. He must accomplish labors to be in the good graces, to prove himself to others. In the case of his family, he must find and kill the man who killed the patriarch of his family if he wants to be welcomed back into the fold. John's cashed in all his favors. He's used his ticket. Now, he has to owe a few favors of his own. He has to give up a piece of himself. John is unlucky in life, love, and friendship. All of these motivations are put on display in the brilliant gambling standoff and Berlin nightclub scene. It allows us to understand why these people fight, how they are fighting, and what it means in the end. One is looking to serve his way out. One is looking to buy his way out. One is looking to kill his way out. Each think they have the winning hand, that their way is the ticket out of this life. But the reality is someone else has the winning hand. In this case, Killa. He cheated his way. I mean, as most people do who get out, they cheat their way out.
I'm playing both sides so that I always come out on top.
What they didn't realize was the moment they sat down at the table to gamble, the moment they committed to their way of getting out, they already lost. Already made a choice that would forever dictate and ruin their lives. The poison they have injected into their world is shown back on them in their injuries during the fight. And now that we're here, oh my god, the goddamn fights. Ugh, the fights! I'll get it out of the way now. It's crazy that that's Scott Adkins under all of those prosthetics, giving such a dynamic and chameleonic performance considering his character exists literally for the sole purpose of being one of John Wick's contracts. John's only way to get close to Killa is to gamble with him, which is right in line with his entire history. He has to win his way out, and ultimately that means he has to kill his way out. He's a man of sheer will and is going to force it if he has to. This guy is one body necessary for John to fall, just so he can then kill another person afterwards in a different kind of contest. The feedback loop of his cycle of violence is self-evident. He needs to climb his way out of the hole atop other bodies, but he's ultimately burying himself underneath them to the point where he can't push his way out. The nightclub fight exemplifies this. He went to kill one man and ended up killing dozens, getting absolutely battered by his target in the process. His physical wounds represent his further corruption, the inches he moves closer to his own destruction, his only true way out from all of this. After the Osaka Continental fight threw everything and literally the kitchen sink at us, combining elements of every single John Wick action sequence before it into a half-hour-long blender of insanity, the Berlin nightclub sequence focuses on water, much like the climactic docks fight from the first film did. The way Stahelski frames the fight against a backdrop of hundreds of extras living their lives dancing, partying, while this brutal onslaught happens around them is, again, not something new for the series, but it's never been shot so elegantly before. These partygoers are witnesses to a baptism for John, the moment where, in fulfilling his hit for his family and ensuring his ability to enter the duel with the Marquis, he is shedding a life of being on the run from the table and instead is declaring his intent to face the music of his life in a final duel. It's a cleansing of his past sins, while bloodying the water he washes them away in with not only the Kingpin's blood, but the blood of several other goons who perish in the fight. As John confronts the demons on the front lines, Winston goes to confront the devil himself in the Louvre. The whole scene in the Louvre is about Winston rebalancing power. It's Winston's comeback. It's the power shift dynamic, and you need to feel power, his character, and with Stahelski to have the confidence to let that play out. To show you he's entering into the world of gods, he's coming into this world of deities, and he's coming in to shift the balance. He passes paintings showing the history of human violence and how it has been used in a way to overthrow the oppressive regimes of the past. It all represents how John Wick can escape from under the table while placing us squarely in the world of gods. The Marquis is looking at these events, seeing himself as above it all. Essentially, all of this is to say that the Marquis has a god complex and views himself as equal with the mythic figures depicted in the paintings, but he's not. He's just the latest in a long line. This feels like the punctuation point, affirmation of beauty in violence or arts in brutality these films have. Winston tempts the Marquis with infamy if he manages to kill John Wick and gets him right where he wants him. He stroked his ego, his god complex, in an effort to convince him to duel John in the ways of old, to repeat history, invoke what has been written. Winston either walks out with his champion, John, or dies with him. Either way, he's made his choice and is reaffirming his commitment to his allies and friends, such as life. Infinity does not suit action film franchises. They say that all good things must come to an end sooner or later, and the end of a great film franchise often lands on the sooner portion of that spectrum. And so it is that John Wick, the legendary genre-changing action franchise, is over only 9 years after its first entry was released in 2014. John Wick's Sisyphus to the criminal underworld's Hades has gotten his boulder to the summit for good. Sure, there's the Ballerina spin-off / prequel arriving soon. Apparently there might be a John Wick 5. I don't know how you could possibly do that, and I don't want to see it. And, they might make other prequels or expand on other characters in this little universe they've built. But John Wick Chapter 4 is a definitive ending to the story that Keanu Reeves and Chad Stahelski defined a lot of the 2010 cinematic landscape with. John is the yin and yang of spirituality. He is truly half monk and half hitman. Part of him doesn't believe anything awaits him after death, but he continues to pray, keep the memory of his wife alive, and try because what if he's wrong? In the eyes of Cain, only the living matter. The dead are gone. Cain is so jaded, he's lost his soul. This world has numbed him, but he has a daughter. He has a reason to keep fighting that is still alive. A person who he loves, a person who gets to pursue their own life and their own passion. He, much like John, is driven by love for another person, but John's wife is dead. John's fight can only benefit himself in his selfish quest to keep his love alive. A quest we can all empathize with, a quest that makes us all root for John Wick. But in the end, it's a quest that results in the deaths of so many people. But on the other hand, John serves as a way out for everyone else in the film. For his old friend Cain, tasked with hunting John down. For Mr. Nobody, who is seeking a big payday from John Wick's bounty. For Winston, seeking to regain his lost status. Even for the Marquis, whose power trip requires John Wick's blood in order to be affirmed. John is a sacrifice for their sins, just as he was the sacrifice for the sins of the bad guys in the first two films, just as he was always going to have to answer for his own sins regardless. It's the most intricate, stacked, interwoven plot of any John Wick film, and the Osaka Continental Massacre serves as a thesis statement proving that the film is capable of juggling all of its threads at once, but also provides nearly 30 minutes of wildly varying action and bloodshed that involves all of the film's players other than Winston and the Marquis spread throughout the entire establishment, culminating in an intimate duel between Donnie Yen and Hiroyuki Sanada. It's just fucking awesome. Shimazu has placed his loyalty to John over the rules of the table, and he fights tooth and nail to make sure the few people who still care for him can live the lives John thinks they deserve. This Buster Keaton action sequence on the stairs is the absolute pinnacle of these movies, and it's one of the greatest action sequences I've just quite frankly ever seen. I mean, I can say that about literally any sequence in this movie. The real-life Frogger sequence around the Arc de Triomphe, the Berlin nightclub sequence, I mean, it goes on. But as for the stair sequence, it overcomes the on-the-nose symbolism of John's uphill battle by being an ever-changing dynamic and tense sequence. In fact, it's worth noting again that when you think about it, the core of this film is three big set pieces. The first in the Osaka Continental, the second in the Berlin nightclub, and the third, the most massive, most brutal, being a tear through the city of Paris. A series of three smaller set pieces strung together which culminate on these steps. A lesser filmmaker would never have been able to sustain this the way Stahelski does. He's constantly changing up what the stunt team is doing, framing each sequence differently. Sure, maybe it's a bit of inspiration from Minority Report, but the Hotline Miami-esque overhead oneer is fucking inspired, man. And making even a simple staircase feel like 10 different locations in one because he's utilizing every last inch of it to make something happen? Even if this sequence did nothing to relate to the narrative, it would still be a masterpiece. Yet here we have John climbing the steps to kill the gods, like Sisyphus repeatedly repelled. The script never loses sight of who John is and his goal. He comes so preciously close to the top once, only to, taking the place of the boulder itself, get kicked all the way back down the staircase. It is only due to Cain's timing and a returned favor from Mr. Nobody that John, in what somehow never feels repetitive, even though it's a literal repeat of what we just saw, manages to fight his way back to the top in time for the duel. His honor and brotherhood trumps all else. But John can't change his nature. This can only end for him in death. Those who cling to death live. Those who cling to life die. And so when John Wick finally summits his boulder, he submits to his fate in the process. Resolving this matter via a duel, the old ways, shows that violence is as much a part of human nature as anything. It's one of our most primal and basic actions. It's barbaric, and yet we're continuously drawn to it in one way, shape, or form, whether it's through media, war, whatever. But what can violence tell you about a person and what they believe in? There is truth in action, character. Stahelski explores that throughout all of these films, but it hits its peak here. The beauty in the banal, it just proves that these systems may try and dress it up, tell you something is different, but killing is killing. Violence is violence, and it hasn't really changed as much as we'd like to think it has. The duel commences, and John suffers a mortal wound, but Marquis succumbs to ego, demanding the killing blow to John Wick. He could have just let Kane kill John, but both Kane and John knew better. They knew a man of Marquis' nature needed to land the final kill so he could claim responsibility for being the one to kill the John Wick. And that action, that decision made of ego was his downfall, and his death is the consequence. Now, he won't be remembered. He'll just be another rich asshole, a tyrant who met their end at the hands of a legend who completed a monumental feat and perished at the top, freeing not only himself, but his friends and loved ones from the iron fist of the high table. One last absolute badass moment for our hero before he passes away, having defied the gods, the table, and death to end his life on his own terms. John Wick has been clinging to life through killing, but in the end, he's finally able to learn how to live by dying. How do you wish to be remembered? How do you sum up a man's life? In the case of Karen, Winston opted to memorialize him as a good friend. There is nobility and honor in that. Karen lived and died as a good man and is the bridge for John's climb to the top of the mountain. John wishes for his tombstone to read, "Loving husband, above all else." No matter how many cruelties he's enacted, how many lives he's taken, it's all out of love for his wife. He lived for Helen, even in death, and in the end, John dies a hero and a dutiful, loving husband. Here's the through and through of John Wick Chapter 4. It's one of the greatest action films I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, genuinely, it's right up there with Fury Road and yeah, anyways, it's a masterpiece of an action film, and anyone who says that Keanu Reeves can't act should really look at the nuances of what he's doing here. It doesn't matter how many fucking lines the guy has. I don't know why that became such a hot topic, but look at how deliberate his line delivery is, how much emotion and pain is coming out of his delivery, his voice, his soul. It's a poignant, beautiful cap to a 4-film series that defined the past decade of action films. And I think for me, it's the best of the 4. But regardless of how you rank them, there's absolutely no question. This is one of the greatest action franchises and films ever made. It didn't take the task of sending John Wick off lightly, but it also doesn't take itself too seriously overall. There has always been self-awareness to the John Wick movies, and that's absolutely present here, and again, it's part of the charm of these movies. From the Lawrence of Arabia match cut, all the way to the Barry Lyndon-esque duel, and all the other inspirations thrown in there, Buster Keaton, Casablanca, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I mean, my god, this thing is dripping with Sergio Leone energy. The Bullet Mustang, I mean, I could go on, but this movie, this franchise is a love letter to action cinema. It's an action movie about action. And John Wick Chapter 4 never eases off the gas pedal. And there are at least a half a dozen moments that deserve to sweep the category if the Oscars finally come to their senses and create a stunts category. I mean, hell, like cinematography, editing, all that good stuff. I mean, this is worthy of being nominated, even winning in those respective categories. Even just the individual set pieces are a miracle of film craft. What Chad Stahelski and Keanu Reeves pulled off in the overall film is a bona fide masterpiece that will stand the test of time and then some, just like the legends that inspired John Wick.